Hello, everyone. So I understand what the subject is, but I'm going to do my best actually to avoid being like preachy at all and just kind of explain some things and talk about some things regarding the Six's meta, quote unquote, because something I see a lot is about how stale the meta is. And I can actually totally understand that sentiment from a surface level because for most casual players of TF2, the variety of the game and variety of strategies are, in some sense, derived through class selection, right? If you're having particular trouble with a sentry nest, for example, you switch to demo to deal with it. Or if the other team has a medic and therefore just automatically gets to win, then someone might switch to medic in order to make it an actual game, right? So the class selection is where most of the strategy is derived from and most of the variety is derived from. So seeing a format where the class selection is mostly figured out, people have mostly figured out which classes are optimized where. You know, you have your classes that are just useful all the time, such as soldier, demo, and medic, and then your classes that are useful defensively, such as heavy and engineer, your pyro for that matter as well. Your classes that are good for trying to get a pick, for example, or breaking a stalemate, such as spy or sniper, and then classes that are good most of the time, except when you need to get defensive, such as scout, right? So most of these situations have been pretty much hashed out and figured out. So there isn't a ton of class variety that you see. And so for a lot of people at a surface level, that seems like a lack of strategy being developed or just very samey, where it's not really the case at all. And in fact, the strategy, well, I guess to put it in a nutshell, the variety in Six's gameplay primarily is derived from strategy and team play compared to just class selection, right? So we can provide an example such as a mid-fight. You play however many number of rounds there are, plus however many round resets there might be, you know, that number of mid-fights per game. You're playing a lot of mid-fights per game, and most of them go very, very similarly. You roll out the exact same way because that's just the optimal way for everyone to get to mid as fast as possible and as healthy as possible to start off, you know, on a good foot. Although I suppose there's some variety as a soldier if you want a fast rollout or whatnot. But you roll out the exact same way, and while there's still some variety in what doors you might roll out to, for example, on Sunshine, a team could roll out Choke or they could roll out Valley. But by and large, you're quite limited in these early stages, and most mids start off in very similar ways. So it's very easy from an outside perspective to think that these are just the same fights that people take over and over again. And to some extent, like, kind of. But, I mean, mid-fights change and you need to adapt and, like, decide the actual strategy that you want to have for that mid-fight, because there are, you know, there's so much variety in the strategies you can have on a mid-fight. I think a really good parallel actually for a mid-fight would be just like a what's the word I'm looking for? Like a starting matchup in Pokemon. So, I mean, how many times have you seen, if you play like Gen 3, have you seen like a Tyranitar versus Zapdos lead, right? It's not rare whatsoever, and you might see a ton of games that have this lead matchup, but they can all play out differently. You know, for some teams, the Zapdos might want to get damage for like a Dugtrio trap on the Tyranitar. For other teams, maybe the Tyranitar is mixed and doesn't have a good way to hit the Zapdos or something, or just fully special, whatever. So what each player wants to do is gonna very much depend on their team and very much depend on their strategy, even though the lead matchup as far as the Pokemon are concerned is the exact same every single time. So once you peel back that surface layer, you see a lot more strategies start to develop. So it's very rewarding on a mid-fight for competitive players to adapt to what their opponents are doing, either adjust your plan to what has been working for the other team or what the other team has been attempting in order to prevent that from working. Or you figure out a strategy that the other team is just incapable of dealing with, and you keep pressing that strategy, kind of putting the onus on the other team to figure out how to counter you as you keep racking up these mid wins. And mids are important to win. Like, the team that wins more mids tends to win the game. And it's just very competitively rewarding to kind of have a team figured out and to adjust to what they're doing in order to win in a fight that starts off on equal footing, right? Mid fight starts off very, very even. So yeah, even though on the surface, yes, all the classes are going to be the same. The rollouts are going to be the same. A lot of the things are going to be the same every single time. It doesn't mean that there isn't more depth underneath, and it doesn't mean that things don't develop. And let's actually provide a concrete example of how the quote-unquote meta, as far as like dominant strategy, has evolved to some degree on Sunshine. So, as I mentioned earlier, Sunshine, you can kind of roll out two different doors. You can roll out 2 choke, or you can roll out Valley. So, as a demo, rolling out choke is generally less safe. There isn't a health pack for you to grab, like there is on most other maps, the rollouts, including actually the Sunshine Valley rollout. You get a health pack, so you are at full HP when you show up to mid. It's not the case if you roll out choke, you're a little bit weaker. You do show up faster, which is nice, but you're also like they're much faster than your team, meaning you're, in conjunction with the low health, you are much more vulnerable to a soldier fast bombing you and just killing you. So that's a real concern. It's very unsafe to roll out choke in many cases. But the Valley rollout is a little more passive. You can get locked out to some degree if the other demo rolls out choke, but you are healthy and generally safer. And teams in general might roll out to one or the other. It's just a crazy feed from me. I shouldn't have bombed that deep. Teams in general can roll out either choke or Valley. The thing about choke is on Sunshine mid, you usually pick a side that you want to play on, either left side or right side. Choke really lets you choose either of these sides like very well because you're positioned just right between them. Valley, you're more leaning towards the left side and kind of shoehorned into playing left side a lot of the time. But that is an option of rolling out choke. However, if you are playing left side on mid, then there's a long walk to get to the left side and approach that, and it's very, very spammable. So that's a real concern. And in reply to a lot of teams rolling out choke, some invite teams, I think Witness was a big one. This is back when like Witness were, well, they're still good, but I don't know if this is the season that they won invite or were at least like really up there. But they would have both their soldiers roll out quickly, like near the point, under the point, to just double spam the other team walking from choke to their left side, right? Which is a huge deal. And in reply, teams started rolling out Valley just to avoid that spam. So you still have metagame development and you still have strategy development, even though on the surface it all kind of looks the same, right? What else? I suppose I can talk next about... Let's talk about some of the ways that the meta has developed in recent years. So, whenever I allude to this in prior videos, there's a couple examples I bring up. So, for starters, the sap and sack strategy is relatively new, all things considered, and that is one in which, let's briefly talk about what a last hold looks like, and even Uber's last hold. You have a very central gun, which does a lot of work. So it watches doorways, it prevents players from just sacking in because it locks onto the bomber and just knocks them away. So they aren't going to be able to do feasible or strong damage to your medic, so your medic's not going to have to use Uber. So the gun exists as a anti-sacking measure, prevents that from happening. It also usually watches some doorways, so you can't take space through these doorways, and you can't really do much. So against some of the really powerful gun spots, you just, like, let's provide an example, like Snakewater is a notoriously difficult last to break because the gun just watches everything. You can't really spam the gun without getting through a door, like past a demo or past a soldier or something, which is already difficult. So because the gun does so much legwork, it's a huge problem for teams to deal with, and a lot of the time for breaking a last, teams might try to spam down the gun before continuing. But this is difficult, and it's kind of a time-wasting endeavor as well, because the more time you're spending and wasting trying to take out a sentry gun that isn't getting taken out, the less time you're going to have to actually sack before the round reset comes and you have to fight for a new mid. So that's a problem. But a strategy that develops out of this is a sap and sack, where you have... Usually a scout is probably better to switch to spy because you're going to be sacking a soldier and you don't want both your soldiers being dead, which would be the case because your spy is going to die as well. But basically you play a spy, and the spy's main objective is not to get a backstab on the med, which can be difficult, especially if the other team knows you have a spy, which in most... Actually, maybe that's something else I'm going to talk about as well. Most teams are going to be aware that you're on spy if you are in a serious setting, such as a high-stakes match. And because of that, you're not likely to get a stab or anything like that. But you still have a sapper, and since the gun is so important to the hold, it's doing so much legwork and heavy lifting when it comes to preventing soldiers from bombing and sacking. And also, I should have mentioned as well that medics tend to position much more forward with their sentry gun closer to the doors, where they would, in theory, be more vulnerable, but because of the gun, they're actually not. But you take the gun out of the equation by sapping it, and then coordinate with your team so that a soldier bombs in while it's being sapped, and suddenly this gun is not denying that bomb whatsoever, and your medic is actually very vulnerable to this bomb, and you have a decent chance of getting that force. So this sap and sack kind of strategy is a relatively new one. It's not something you would have seen very often a couple of years ago. And to be fair, it's not like super common now, but especially on like maps like Sultry and stuff like that, not the rarest thing to see whatsoever. And if you just incidentally have a spy that was trying to go for a stab, then you might see teams kind of convert that into a sap kind of play. Because not only do you have the soldier bombing in, but you also have the spy who just sapped the gun just walking at your medic with their revolver or something like that, which is a surprisingly powerful weapon, actually. Like, the revolver can get some surprise kills, even. Yeah, so another strategy that I alluded to earlier, and I'm sorry that I don't have, like, very concrete examples of them on screen. That would be a little bit more effort from my end. But anyway, I alluded to earlier that you are not likely, or if you're playing spy, it's pretty likely that the other team... Did I just get a Twitch follow? I guess I did while I was offline here. Interesting. Sorry about that notification. So it's, excuse me, what was I saying? It's quite unlikely that the other team is unaware, using double negatives here. The team is most likely going to know that you're on spy if you're rolling out spy in an even Uber's last situation, when, let's say, you know, in a serious match. Why is that? Well, as I mentioned earlier, spy has disguises. Man, scatterbrained right now. Spy can disguise. Everyone knows that spy can disguise. Oh, we have a pause here. Let's try and skip this. Everyone knows that spy has a disguise. But spy disguises have some interesting mechanics that competitive players have found some utility in. So, when you disguise as a class, your disguise will prioritize a player that is on that class. I think everyone knows this, right? When you disguise as, you know, a scout, and there's a scout on the other team, then you're disguised as that scout. This has some interesting applications, because if you disguise as a spy, for example, if the other team has a spy, then you will disguise as them. There are ways to make it really easy to give away if there's a spy. For example, if you have the 3D player model on your HUD, you get to see their cosmetics. If they have custom, they have, you know, unlockable weapons equipped, then you can see that they have that. Any named weapons, anything like that, you'll be able to see and just instantly know, yes, they have a spy. But barring all of that, if they're even running full stock loadout, no cosmetics, nothing for you to discern, if you just redisguise as that class multiple times and you're getting the same player over and over again, then you have a pretty reasonable guess that they're on this class. So this is mostly used for spy and sniper, but you can even use it to verify like what medigun medics are on to see if they're on Kritzkrieg, which, as a kind of counter meta strat, medics will often name their mediguns to kind of confuse that and make it so that you can't verify whether they are on crits or stock based on a spy check. But spy checking has become a really big thing to the point where, you know, even a few years ago, not as common. You might see it in like some of the really sweaty environments, but here in an even Uber's stalemate on last, there's really nothing better to do a lot of the time. There's almost always going to be a free player. You have someone stuck on engineer, your medic and your demo aren't going to switch off. But, you know, your other scout might be on like sniper or something. Pretty easy for them to just switch when the other player spawns, and just like that, switch back after checking. A soldier can do this a lot of the time as well, because it just doesn't take that much time, all things considered. So yeah, it's very easy to do since the spawn is right there. So teams will just do it because it's easy to do. And then most of the threat of off classes like sniper and spy come from the surprise factor. That first sniper shot is the most dangerous, and the spy that other players don't know about is you know, much more dangerous than the spy that the team does know about. So just by checking and just by confirming that they're on those classes, they are much less dangerous. So teams obviously check them. And this spy checking for off classes is, you know, something that has really burgeoned as a very common strategy nowadays. Yeah. I think I do want to talk about... So, as I was alluding to, or not alluding to, but just talking directly about earlier, when you look under the surface level, you start to see a lot more interesting strategies and a lot of interesting dynamics as far as, you know, strategies and counterplay is concerned. And I want to provide some examples from the recent RGL LAN I went to, specifically like Grand Finals. Because I remember watching Grand Finals and some really cool stuff was happening, but it's stuff that's under the surface that you wouldn't have really known necessarily. And I don't just want to talk about like individual plays, although I will mention, and I, again, don't have the footage here. I'm going to look actually for the LAN stuff to see if I can't find some time-stamped examples of what I'm talking about, so you can actually look. So check the description for that. But as far as individual plays goes, I want to focus more on like the team stuff. But one big individual play that's like very flashy on the surface of, for example, you know, Banny peeking bats on sniper for a hero shot and then just instantly dropping the med. But even a play like that, there's a lot of rhyme and reason to it, because when you know the other team is playing to leave Valley, for example, rather than playing Plat, or playing to leave Cafe or something. I don't recall. It wasn't disad because they had, so I'm assuming they were just playing like counter sack. But in a position like that, you know, teams playing Valley is a relatively recent development as well, I should mention. And it's kind of counterintuitive because you might want to gravitate towards the high ground of Plat next to second, which is such a commanding position. And you get to kind of control everything. It's very safe for a counter sack to play that kind of position. But Valley is even safer, actually. The disadvantage of Valley is the fact that you are kind of giving up holding Shutter as effectively, or at all, even for that matter. And Bats is much more vulnerable. So knowing that, suddenly a sniper peek on Bats that is now much less held than it would be otherwise against a more traditional hold starts to make a lot of sense as a kind of counterplay aggressive sniper peek against a team that is choosing to do that positioning, right? So even under the surface, these individual plays that are very flashy have a lot of reason behind them. But I want to talk about two examples of very interesting things that there might be more under the surface. And even though it might seem kind of samey and stale meta or whatever, it's actually very interesting. So the first example was actually on Sunshine, and it was a series of Uber flip-flops. So a flip-flop is basically, some players call it a leapfrog as well. It's basically when one team has Uber add, and they just choose to pop their Uber to cap the next point. And you have a chance to like kill their medic, and in which case it would still be add. Or you can like get multiple kills with which you can pressure forward. So if you take a flip-flop Uber and you kill like a demo soldier, then you're quite likely to be able to pressure into that next point and maybe even get a sack off. It's just good things for you. It's not like a strictly neutral exchange. But if you don't kill the other medic, which oftentimes you don't unless they're caught, then it's going to be disad, right? Because you use their Uber, they never did. So now they're going to have ad, which is why it's kind of the flip-flop, where now the other team has ad. You're expecting them to be able to try and push into your own point. It's a pretty strong strategy just for a couple reasons. For one, it's very easy to follow. It's easy to just take an Uber and then transition into disad. And it also leaves a lot on the table for things to go wrong for the opponents, for them to slip up, because you can get kills and then pressure forward. Likewise, you're also putting the other team in a position where they suddenly have to push, and they can mess that up. Things like this. So a flip-flop can be a nice strategy. But basically what we're seeing is between Freyotech and Leica G6 is these teams were just flip-flopping back and forth. I think it was into mid, if I'm not mistaken, from like G6's second. I could be getting some of the details wrong. But they flip-flop back and forth multiple times. And these are like close flip-flops as well. They're getting some kills here and there, but never getting the med. So it is messy, but both teams are really holding on and trying to maintain their advantage before Ubering into the next point. So from an outside perspective, it seemed really, what's the word I'm looking for? It seems really samey, right? These teams are just doing the same thing back and forth. It doesn't seem like any progress is being made. However, at a like deeper level, you look and see that Lolguy, the medic for G6, is actually building their Uber better than Hubita on Froyo is. Meaning that long term, even though they're flip-flopping back and forth, Ubers will slowly but surely even out. And this, of course, favors G6 because they're building better. So in the long term, because of that slightly better building, through all this chaos and whatnot, they're still making progress. And I think long term they do get the point. I'm not sure. But I remember in the moment being very excited, like, oh, look, like they're building so much better. This is going to start to even out. It's very exciting, right? Even though on a surface level, doesn't seem like that at all. The next example I want to talk about is one that many casual players would look at and say, oh, look, finally some variety. Because what I'm talking about is actually on Gully Wash, when bot mode stayed on Pyro, pushed out of last on Pyro, and actually ended up staying on Pyro until they pushed into the other team's last, and they end up winning the round, pushing into last with a Pyro. So on a surface level, this does seem like, oh, finally the breath of fresh air. These like comp sweaties are finally doing some variety, making things a little bit different from their stalemate or whatever. I'm not saying this like, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm not trying to be like snide or anything. Just trying to prove a point, or rather be dramatically, whatever. It doesn't matter what my expression there is, but when you actually take a look underneath, there's a lot more going on than just variety, like playing Pyro for Pyro's sake. So let's talk about Pyro a little bit in the Sixes meta game and why this is so interesting, such an interesting decision from bot mode. So Pyro is probably the closest class to being viable full time. There's still a bunch of glaring weaknesses, such as just getting completely eaten alive by scouts and demos, which are something you're definitely going to have to look out for in Sixes. There's no shortage of them. On top of like mobility issues and things like that, on top of just generally not being that effective in 1v1 settings, because even the class that you have a positive matchup against, being Soldier, they are in no means obligated to take fights with you and can just jump away, right? So Pyro still struggles a lot. Pyro is still very exploitable, and as a result, you just don't see Pyros that often. That being said, Pyro has some positive traits. Air Blast is a big one. You know, just being able to rack up Afterburn is pretty nice as well. Now, if a long fight goes on and you have multiple players on fire, that's actually a lot of damage ticking up on the opponents, and that's a difficult thing for them to deal with. But Air Blast is, of course, the big one. And being able to completely erase spam with Air Blast is such a powerful tool, and arguably a poorly designed one as well. I think that spam already has very, fair counterplay, and just eliminating it completely is a little excessive, but whatever. But that's a powerful tool for Pyro. Now, because of mobility issues and all the things I've talked about before, Pyro tends not to be very strong on 5 CP. Tends not to be that strong on Koth either, but a little bit better. Off classes in general tend to be a little bit stronger on Koth, just because, you know, the mobility issues they have is a little less pronounced because you aren't traversing the map as far in Koth. But 5 CP definitely don't see Pyros very often, mostly just a defensive measure with that Air Blast in order to either protect a sentry gun or try and stuff an Uber, things like that. And that is what bot mode was using Pyro for on last initially, is as a defensive class, as you would expect. However, Gully Wash is a little special. Gully Wash is known as kind of the mid to last map because it's so folded in on itself and twisting around that it's very easy to traverse around the map very quickly. So as a result, Pyro's a little bit stronger. On top of the fact that it's widely regarded as like a soldier map, that scouts can really struggle on because it's very choky, very close range encounters a lot of the time. So, in conjunction with the fact that these kinds of conditions can favor a more close range class such as Pyro, and on top of the fact that the alternative class being a flank scout is really not that potent on a Gully Wash. You're not giving up that much on a flank scout on Gully, so a Pyro is not terrible. So with these in mind, Pyro might be the perfect class for a Gully Wash. I should mention as well that Pyro has a lot of really powerful strategies into last, and sometimes players will switch to Pyro specifically to pressure into last, because Gully Wash is unique in that you can flank the last point, like the control point, pretty easily. You go from river down into water, and then you can, you know, re-emerge just behind the point. And on a Pyro, you can reflect spam from a soldier on the ring or something. Who's like, that's the main strategy to prevent players from water just capping the points. You have a soldier on high ground above the point to deny that. Well, Pyro can kind of deny that, as well as air blast people off the point who are physically trying to stop it. So again, Pyro has actual use into this point, as competitive players have figured out. So with all this in mind, why is it so special that bot mode decides to stay on Pyro for this entire round? Well, it's because it works, and it actually makes sense why he would do it. In my opinion, I don't think there's much interesting variety in someone playing a full-time Pyro because that's the class they like to play or their main, because that's kind of what you'd expect. But when a player who is an invite champion, who's doing everything that they possibly can in order to win the most high-stakes match of the entire season, when you're putting a player in these conditions and they still choose that strategy, that's interesting. And that's actually special, because you know that they're only doing that for the unique merits that this class brings. So what actually ended up happening? Well, we saw, and to be clear, bot mode did not run full-time Pyro this match. Far from it. But in this instance, when he's on Pyro, on last, as you would expect defensively, and they end up getting that force or like multiple kills or something, I don't remember the exact situation, they start to push out, and pushing out of last on Pyro is not the rarest thing. But you usually switch off sometime after. Pushing out of last can be nice on Pyro because, you know, walking river, it's a very, claustrophobic space. So having that air blast to reflect spam can be quite nice. But he stays on Pyro and continues pushing into mid with Pyro. And in fact, they have the opportunity to push second. And you can see bot mode is very deliberate when they push second as well. Like, he is standing in choke, looking out for the soldier high bomb and looking out for the spam, trying to reflect both of those things, which are the two primary threats that you have to deal with pushing through choke. So Pyro uniquely equipped to be able to deal with this, right? And then comes time to push last. And here things kind of fall off a little bit, in my opinion. He does rush the point. He does try and reflect people off. I think he gets cap time as well. So honestly, like, decent utility. But Pyro can be really, really strong into that last. And I think they may have been able to get more value. But ultimately, G6 do win that round with the Pyro. Which, yes, it seems like... Oh, this was funny. I was so slow to roll out that soldier that was trying to fast roll out on me just missed me entirely. So... on the surface level, it does seem like it's variety, finally, like the meta is different. But it's actually, the interesting thing about it is when you peel back that surface layer, the reason why this Pyro pushed all the way out of last and into the other team's last is actually the same motivating reasons and drivers behind all the other decisions that people would consider quote unquote stale. So there is actually like reason and strategy behind all these decisions. And that's why I think that while you can levy criticism at things being stale because you don't see variety in classes and weapons nearly as much, although with weapons as well, like weapons definitely come and go. There's, you know, different dominance, you know, I guess eras about them. Lock and load very popular now. Some people want to ban it in North America because of how popular it's become. And, you know, a few seasons back, the Market Gardener was huge back when Jay was showing everyone, like, yeah, this thing's really, really good. And since then, it's really fallen off, all things considered. So things still come and go as far as, like, the weapon selection and variety goes. Anyway, but even though you don't see as much variety in things like this, even though competitive players have largely figured out where certain classes are good and bad and kind of adhere to that in order to win, even though this is all true, the actual variety and strategy beneath the surface level is constantly evolving and quite interesting. And I suppose I can close off. This is something that I wish that, as far as casted games go, this was a little more emphasized, the kind of why behind things. Because I understand that, like, you know, when a player makes like an interesting play or hits a cool shot or whatever, like obviously that's something that you want to point out and give credit to. But I think it's quite useful as well for like new players to actually explain why something might happen, like why a team might choose to use an Uber here, or why a team with like 20 ad decides to call things even, for example, or just like actually set the stage so that these decisions can make some sense, so that even though, yes, it's 2 soldiers, 2 scouts, a demo, and a medic, even though that hasn't changed, it's still, you're still understanding the thought process and understanding the strategies and maybe getting a bit of that depth below the surface level that is so important, in my opinion. And I think that's something that could be emphasized a little bit more, but that's nitpicking. But anyway, hopefully my ramblings here made some sense. Hopefully they were useful to hear, or at least entertaining. There is a lot of strategy in who would have guessed it, that the 15-year-old competitive game has a lot of strategies built into it. But these strategies are constantly evolving, even though you admittedly have to look under the surface level. So while yes, to kind of close things out and reiterate what I said at the start, while yes, at a casual level, most of the strategy and diversity is derived from class selection, that's not the case in a competitive setting. And in sixes, most of the variety and strategy is derived from, you know, counterplaying dominant strategies, exploiting classes for what they're good at, and exploiting weapons for what they're good at, playing together as a team, teamwork, all these sorts of things that are a little harder to see on the surface, but once you look underneath, it's very, very rich, actually. So yeah, I think I successfully avoided just being preachy with it. Well done, me. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed. And actually, are we about to win? I don't know if we're about to win or not. This was a big upset. This was our first match at LAN, and was definitely... Okay, I don't think we're about to win. This doesn't look like ad. Although it's really nice pressure. Oh, we killed a soldier. Oh, the gun. Killed the demo. Yeah, we're not close to closing it out here. But we do go on to win this. Let it be known. Anyway, I'll see you all next time.